thank you for everyone joining us today. My name is Mercy Kipenda. I am one of the NFIP and outreach specialists here at the agency. I'm joined today by my colleague Isabella, who will be taking the second half of the class. This is our agenda for today. So we start with the introduction, and then we'll go through working with difficult clients, how to address violations, floodplain management scenarios, and then at the end, questions. Floodplain management scenarios will be the second half of this class, and that's the one that Isabella is gonna walk us through. All right, so having difficult conversations. So what we're going to tackle in this topic today, we're going to look at understanding the basics of the NFIP, including the overall mission. And then we're also going to understand the roles, responsibilities, authority of the FPA, that's the floodplain administrator, and how to be resourceful, knowledgeable, and understanding in your role. So understanding the NFIP. So the National Flood Insurance Program was founded in 1968 as a protection against the financial hardships of flooding. So communities manage development in the special flood hazard area as a condition of the NFIP participation through an agreement. So this agreement is that the federal government makes flood insurance available within communities that adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations to reduce flood risk and to new floodplain development. So basically, the federal government makes flood insurance available, and the community adopt and enforces floodplain management, which is what most floodplain administrators do. And then development is managed in accordance with the local floodplain management ordinance. Hopefully, all the floodplain administrators here know or have their local ordinance. If you do not know where your local ordinance is, you can always reach out to us, and we can either help you draft a new one or help you locate it if we have it on file. The mission of the NFIP is to educate the American properties about the risk of flooding, to provide flood insurance, which is generally unavailable in the private insurance market, to accelerate recovery from flood damage, to mitigate future flood loss through local floodplain regulations, and to reduce the personal and national cost of disaster. So all this, knowing that the bottom line is to make sure that you protect loss of life and property. So the NFIP in general could just be looked at. The FEMA maps floodplain areas, so they let you know which areas are at risk of flooding, and then they make the regulations that you have to adhere to make sure that you're building safely in those areas, and then they provide insurance to protect those assets. So basically, that's what the NFIP is all about. And the most important thing for doing all of this is to protect life and property. And sometimes we forget when we're going through our day-to-day floodplain management issues that is the basic or the purpose of floodplain management. So why do communities participate? So firstly, flood insurance, as I mentioned. Flood insurance is required when a structure with a federally backed mortgage or loan is in an identified floodplain, which can be difficult to find through private insurance. So the insurance that is available through the NFIP is at a discounted rate. It can be found almost anywhere in the country, and it's easy to pay out because it's federal money. Even if you have a bunch of claims, especially when a flood happens, usually it affects a lot of people, and private insurance are unable to pay out those claims. But for the NFIP, because it's federal money, so they're usually able to pay out. Decreased liability, which is an active floodplain management program, which reduces risk to life and property, and then also flood mitigation. So by mitigating flood damages before an event occurs, your community can recover faster after an event. And so that's the purpose of the regulations that you have in your ordinance. So if there's a new structure that is coming up, they have to follow the regulations to make sure that that structure is mitigated against flood damages. And then you have the federal disaster assistance, which is communities not taking steps to protect their infrastructure and future development may not qualify for certain forms of federal disaster assistance because, again, they want to make sure that the structures that are at risk are protected. And if you're not enforcing those regulations, then you will not have access to federal disaster assistance. So what is a floodplain administrator? I'm sorry. The floodplain administrator is the individual in a community tasked with implementing the floodplain management program. So most of you have this role. It is an assigned title within the local ordinance. It can be assigned to any recognized position within a community. So you may be a floodplain administrator, but you're also a clerk. You may be a zoning administrator, emergency manager, planner, etc. It may also be contracted to an external person or group. So no minimum training is required to be an FPA in Nebraska. So the only training that you usually get is through the classes that we provide here at the agency. Or if you would like, some go ahead and get the CFM, which is a test that you get to become a certified floodplain administrator. But that's usually not required unless your ordinance or your community requires it for that role. So the floodplain administrator acts as the community representative for all things floodplain. So this includes acting as the floodplain permitting officer, the ordinance enforcement officer. So the enforcement authority lies within the community. So whenever a floodplain administrator signs a permit, that becomes the official permit. And so the enforcement authority is on the community. We at the agency do not have any enforcement authority. The local contact for citizens, community officials, and leadership to discuss floodplain issues. And they're also a point of contact for floodplain mapping, project updates, training, community compliance, reviews, and citizen complaints. Moving on to tips for floodplain administrators. So one of the key components is to be resourceful, be understanding, and be knowledgeable. I'm going to go through each and every one of these and explain what that means in the coming slides. So be resourceful. The best floodplain administrators know how to use the resources available to them. So start off with what information is available to me already. Who can I reach out to for more information? Where can I send this person to find out more? Or who can I contact to ask more difficult questions? So all these are good points for being resourceful. When you're able to answer these questions, then already you're at the first step of that. Educating the public. You have to inform the public about the NFIP and the location of the floodplain. Most people do not know that they live in the floodplain and they don't even know about the maps. And so the only way that you can run an effective floodplain management program is when people know that they're in the floodplain and what that means to them. So it's your job to inform the public about that and what is the best way to reach your specific community. Usually flyers, newspaper listings, mailers. Some communities that have websites, they put a little section on the community website letting them know about the NFIP and putting the ordinance on there, the floodplain ordinance that people have access to. All that is good information to put out. This will also work really well when you have an issue or like a violation, as I'm going to talk about in the next slides. But when people already know that they're in the floodplain, it's much easier to navigate those situations than when somebody says, well, I didn't know anything about this, and then they've built something that is non-compliant. So that becomes a little bit more difficult for you as a floodplain administrator. So just get ahead of it. Make these flyers. You can reach out to us. We can help you with some of these materials or resources that we can help you with. So yeah, this is a great way to get that started. You can also give a brief presentation to your governing board. Floodplain management is easier to do when your local government understands it. And most of the floodplain administrators know this because sometimes your governing body doesn't know anything about floodplains. And so if they don't know anything, they cannot support you or support your work. So sometimes floodplain administrators do this. Every time a board meets, they're able to talk about the NFIP and let them know where the floodplain is, what regulations are required, and things like that, which becomes much more easier. If you need help with talking to your governing body, here at the agency, you can contact us. Sometimes we do attend board meetings and we just give them the information that they need and let them know this is real and this is happening. So you can always do that. Secondly, is being knowledgeable. So have a basic understanding of floodplains and what they mean to developers. We have done a couple of classes on this, but you can also reach out to us and we can help you with that. Community members and developers will feel much more comfortable working with someone who can provide even the most basic information. So floodplain management in itself is huge. There are always so many aspects to it. And sometimes if you're not working in it all the time, you may forget some things and you may not know something. So it's always good to remember the three legs of the NFIP, which is the flood insurance, floodplain maps, floodplain regulations. So as long as you at least know a bit of this, or you know who to go to ask, then you're on the right track. But it's always a good way to be knowledgeable in that way. You can also know your community. So communicate with community members within properties in the floodplain. Remind them that flood insurance is available. Provide your contact information and always be available for questions. There'll always be a lot of questions about floodplains because people still do not understand what floodplains are. So you are the local contact person that they can learn about these things. Talk with your community members about their experiences too. Um, Next is know your responsibility. So review your floodplain ordinance. As I mentioned, if you do not know where your floodplain ordinance is or you do not have it, you can always contact us and we'll either help you track it down or help you draft a new one. Your local floodplain ordinance has got all the regulations that needed to administer your floodplain management program. It also highlights the permitting section. It lets you know how to build, design, and all that. It also lets you know if you've got higher standards or anything that is associated with floodplain management. So you don't necessarily have to know the entire ordinance, but at least just know the permitting sections and what your responsibilities are, which are all laid out in your floodplain management, in your floodplain ordinance. Be familiar with those responsibilities, establish a procedure for floodplain project reviews and permitting. This is a good way to go about your responsibilities as well. If you have a procedure, you have like a go-to that you can easily go to and follow a procedure. And sometimes the roles change. So the clerk may be the floodplain administrator today. In a few years, it changes to the zoning person. And so if you already have like a procedure established, it's easier for that new person to go through that procedure and administer the floodplain management. You can also see the Nebraska's Floodplain Management Welcome Guide, which is on our website under the digital desk reference. There is a link. If you have the slides, there's a link here that takes you straight to that, and that will give you the information of if you are a new floodplain administrator or if you just want a refresher on that. Secondly is know your floodplain. So be familiar with your community floodplain maps. A great way to do this is using our online interactive maps or your flood insurance web maps. The interactive maps can be found at our website. And so when you there should be a link here somewhere where you can just click on it and then you take the interactive map. You put in an address and you're able to see where your floodplains are. Or you can use the flood insurance rate maps, which are the firms. You can find these at the FEMA Map Service Center. You can also download them and have them as copies in your office. Know what houses and businesses exist within the floodplain. That's a good way. This also helps when you have a disaster. And so you know how to go about the substantial damage and substantial improvement assessments. Learn about past flooding events within your community. And so again, the resources is the interactive map, the FEMA Map Service Center, the State Flood Hazard Mitigation Plan for info on past flooding events. All this can be found at our website. And then we're going to go into types of floodplains. So there are many types of floodplains representing different flood risks. So when you open the interactive map, this is little picture here is what you basically see, depending on the level of regulations that your community has. So the zones are identified by letters and numbers. So from zone A to zone 899 to zone X. Some are regulatory, others simply indicate risk. So high risk are the regulatory ones, which are zone A, zone AE, zone A1 to 30, and zone A to 99. And then you have moderate to low risk. So these are shaded zone X and shaded zone X and zone B and C. I'm going to go into details into all of this in the next coming slides. The easiest way to find a floodplain in your community is to explore the Nebraska Floodplain Interactive Map. So there is the link to the interactive map, and that is what you will see when you go to that interface. This is probably the first page. You have the blue blob, which is the regulatory floodplain, and then you have the community boundaries, which are usually in yellow, and then if you have a floodway, that will be in red, and then this yellow box is usually if you have a BFE determination in that section, you will have that. So yeah, our interactive map is very helpful. We've done a class on this. If you go on a training page, you'll be able to find that class there, and it will help you on how to navigate the interactive map. And then flood zones on frame panels. So the frame panels are the ones that you get on the FEMA Map Service Center. So if you can see clearly on zone A is a flood hazard area that does not have BFEs. So this is just basic analysis of the floodplain. And so it's not gone into detail. So they just do a basic detailed flood hazard area, and it does not have BFEs. The floodplain administrator, if you have somebody that wants to develop in zone A, you are able to request for a BFE determination from our office. And there are some restrictions to that. You cannot do for an area that is more than 50 acres and 5 acres and 50 lots. But anything less than that, you are able to request that. And then 2, that's zone AE, is the 1% annual chance floodplain with written BFEs. So this one will already have the BFEs on there. And you can also get them from doing your determination using the flood insurance study report. And then number 3 on there is the floodway. That is how it is depicted on the frame. It will have the white stripes going through it. And then it's like a black line going through the map. I'm not sure if you can really see the details of this map, but that is how it will look like. And then number 4 is the shaded zone X, which is the 0.2 annual chance floodplain. That would be the black dotted area that is right outside the blue dotted area. Unshaded X zones include other areas considered of low risk. So if there isn't any shading on it, it may still be zone X, as it is shown on this picture. And then 6 is cross sections. This can be used to determine the BFE by utilizing a flood insurance study. So for these areas, you will not get a BFE determination from us. You will need to do it by yourself using a flood insurance study, or you can always contact us and we can help you through that process as well. Very important, not all firms look alike. Always refer to your map's legend for the correct symbology. So once you have that firm, just make sure that it's the correct community and it's talking to your specific area. And it may look different depending on the area of regulations that you have. Some will only have zone A Some will have with the floodway, some will not have the floodway and such. And this is how the flood zone look like on the interactive map. So on the interactive map, Zone A is a flood hazard area that does not have BFE. So that's the blue area that is being pointed to here. That will be Zone A. And then Zone AE is the 1% annual chance floodplain with written BFE. So where arrow number 2 is pointing, that is Zone AE. Zone AE and Zone A really look alike most of the time because they're all blue blobs. So you have to look at the actual writing of if it's Zone A or Zone AE. And then arrow number 3 is the floodway that is depicted there. So that is the red striped area with the white boundaries around it. That will be the floodway. Arrow number 4 is the shaded Zone X, which is the 0.2 annual chance floodplain. And then arrow number 5, that will be the unshaded Zone X, which includes other areas considered low risk. And then finally, arrow number 6 points to the cross sections. That's how they will look like on your interactive map, and this can be used to determine the BFE by utilizing a flood insurance study. We have done a class on determining BFEs using a flood insurance study, but you can also always contact our office and we will help you through that process. We cannot determine it for you, but we can help you through the process of determining BFE using flood insurance study. Next is being understanding. So a floodplain permit is likely not only the only document that they're working through to complete the project. As we all know that when somebody is doing like a building project, there's a lot of parts going through and they're trying to figure everything else. And so be understanding that they are probably already in a stressful situation. And regulations are really, really hard to understand, especially if that's the first time you're hearing about them. So, approach it with an understanding view. Be available, and if needed, let them vent. People sometimes they're really not mad at you or upset with you. They just really want somebody to listen to them, and you can be that person for them and let them vent, let them tell you what they're going through. And then you can also use our office of FEMA as the bad guy. You can be like, hey, these are not, my regulations, the FEMA regulations. We just have to follow them, and this is what they provide for us and things like that. So we're always good to be used as the bad guy. So you can always use us. And remember, we provide technical assistance, but we are not an enforcement authority for your community. So all the enforcement comes through your office. And so we only provide technical assistance. So difficult situations can mean a few things. It can be meeting project timelines, extra financial expenses for floodplain compliance, general unfamiliarity with floodplain regulations, and for some, understanding the regulations may not necessarily mean they plan to meet them. So this is the basic understanding of what a difficult situation would be for a floodplain administrator. So some of the things that you can do is answer their questions. Again, be their guide. Remember when we talked about being knowledgeable and being resourceful and all that, this is when it comes into play. So do not neglect regulations to please a project proponent. And sometimes this may happen because some communities are small and everyone and everybody knows you. And so if somebody comes and say, hey, I just need to get this done, and you neglect the regulations for them, when we do come in for a community assistance visit and that is done, that responsibility or that liability falls on the community. So do not neglect regulations to please a project proponent. If possible, relate the experience to similar situations. If it's your first time permitting, you can always contact another floodplain administrator who's a neighboring to your community, or you can call us and we'll give you similar strategies that you can use to relate to that experience. Provide resources and materials that may be helpful for their situations. So we have this answers to questions about the NFIP. It's usually like a booklet like this that has most of the questions and answers in there. You can also find it on our digital desk reference with the link that is put below. And so this is some of the common questions that you can look up and see how those were answered. Help community members understand the NFIP and your responsibilities. This is always key, and you can always find this in your ordinance, which is a very important tool for this. So let them know where the standards come from and why they are in place, so that they just don't think you're just making this up. Let them know there are federal and state statutes that need to be followed, and it's not just some that can be ignored. Help to make floodplain regulations less overwhelming to understand. So you can use less jargon and just explain it as plainly as you can. You know, this is a floodplain, this is what you're building. This is why you're supposed to build the way you are. Most of it is basic common sense. Like if you're going to build in a place that's going to flood, you obviously want to elevate that to protect your structure. Why would you want to build an expensive structure that is just going to flood, which is going to cause you more money? So it's better you do this now. You mitigate this now and lowers your risk than you having to do it all over again when you have been flooded. So use like the basic language that they can understand that makes sense to them. Offer to meet with community members to discuss project ideas in person, because sometimes people can be talked to well when you're with them in person than on the phone or through an email. So you can always meet the members and talk to them through the process. Provide an itemized actionable list of what is required. So this is an example of a compliance item checklist. So just highlight what the issue is, what needs to be done. Let them have a copy every time you contact them, and every time they provide something or a document that is related to that issue, check it off so they know that they are working through something, and it's just not an ever-ending list of things. So they know exactly what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it and what it is that they're doing. So this usually helps. Contact the Nebraska Floodplain Management Division for assistance. So that's our office. We're always happy to help floodplain administrators with anything that they need. Often we can help you navigate your next conversation with them as well. If possible, demonstrate that this has been enforced in the past. So some people may feel like they're the only person that these regulations are being applied to. So when you let them know, hey, this is how this person does it, this person does it, show them pictures, this is how they elevated. You're not the only one who's following these regulations. So this is a good way to go when you're navigating these situations. Ask them about alternative building options or location, particularly areas outside of the regulatory floodplain. So when you know where your floodplain is using the interactive map, you know where all the boundaries are. You can let them know, hey, maybe you don't want to build, next to a floodway. Maybe you want to build somewhere where it will not flood, where there's a chance of flooding, where there's a 1% chance of flooding every year. Maybe you want to build somewhere else. So, give them alternative building options and make sure that you're just not telling them, here are the regulations and that's it. You're giving them more information on how they can build or where they can build and things like that. So that is usually helpful. And then tips for communication: relate to your audience. Think of what's important for them to know. So think, if you were in their place, what would you want to hear if you're in a process of a project and you're constructing something? What is it that you want to hear from a floodplain administrator? So think of those things when you are talking to a client. Avoid jargon, speak plainly, avoid discussions of technical topics, which can be very confusing most of the time. When you start going down technical topics, and I know floodplain administration has a lot of scientific and technical topics, so you try to avoid those and just speak plainly, speak to them to what makes sense. tell stories. Personal accounts help make a person relatable. You can sometimes, I know that like clerks have the Clerks Academy, and sometimes they have those conferences. And so when you go to those, talk to other FPAs and hear what their stories are. And when you go to meet a client, you have some personal accounts that you can let them know about, or someone where you've heard somebody had gone through a similar situation. Be credible. Answer questions honestly. If you don't have the answers, you will look into it and will follow up with more information. It's always better to say you don't know or you find out more about it than for you to give a false answer. And so the credibility will help you in the long run, because you're not just helping your community member, but you're also uplifting that office. And then we're going to move on to addressing violations. So how do you address a violation? Violations happen often are due to miscommunications or misunderstanding. Addressing any violation starts with notifying the owner. Violations must be resolved to the maximum extent possible. So this could be flood proofing, relocation, elevation, or demolition. Work with the Nebraska Floodplain Management Division for assistance throughout the process. So a violation can mean a failure of a structure or other development to be fully compliant with the community's management regulations. For example, if you're missing a compliance certificate, such as an elevation certificate, or if you brought into full or partial compliance, sometimes structure may not have been permitted or unpermitted work. That could be a violation, and sometimes it's just people have not built according to the regulations. And so implementing the enforcement, stay on top of violations to make sure that they do not go to FEMA. So when our office is working with you, with your community on a violation, that is the best case scenario. So as long as you're updating us and you're giving us updates on everything on how they're progressing with that violations, we usually manage to work the violations out. But if there is no communication and it's quiet and nobody's doing anything, that's when we move that violation up to FEMA, and then that they have enforcement authority. And so that is not what you want. So what you want is to work with us so that you can help your community member solve that violation, and that it's brought into full or partial compliance. If the owner is the problem, inform the owner of the violation through an official notice on community letterheads. So we do have templates of this here. And so if you need to use a notice, which is the last stage, after you've tried talking to them, after you've maybe given them a call, especially for small communities, if you know the person, just, give them a call and say, hey, we need to get this done with. Because sometimes when you just send a violation notice, people go on the defense already because that's an official, and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to have to inform lawyers and things like that. So sometimes a violation may get out of hand when it really doesn't need to. Sometimes a violation needs is, hey, we just need you to sign a permit, or we just need to permit this. Or for example, there was one person that had a shed in the floodplain, and they didn't really know about the regulations, but they had it was considered an accessory structure, and so they needed to have flood vents in it. And so it's a structure that's already done, it's already been put in place, and we're telling them, hey, you have to make this compliant by putting hose in it. And so if that committee had just sent a notice letter and letting them know about that, they would have been on the defense. But all they actually needed to do was just put the flood vents in there, and the person already even had the flood vents. They just didn't want to put them in because they didn't look nice. And so it wasn't even an issue of, hey, this is a big violation, just like, hey, we need you to get this in. And it was a matter of day and they got those in. So before you send a notice, just give them a call, let them know what the issue is and how they can resolve it. But when you do need to send a notice, notification requirements should be outlined in a floodplain ordinance. Violators may not even realize they're doing something wrong until they're directly notified, as I mentioned. If it gets to a point where you need to use penalty and police powers in the ordinance, issue a stop work order if your community has authority, or revoke previously issued permits. And this is when now you can't really do anything, that being too difficult, that it's not moving anywhere, and so you can start to use those powers. Violation notices should include a description of the development, an explanation for why it is a violation, and then references to the regulations the development is in violation of, and then next actionable steps. This is a really good way to get a violation done if you have next actionable steps. Like I mentioned, having an action list is really good. You keep a copy, they keep a copy, you can send us a copy so that we know and we can track progress like that. And once they start checking those things off, it seems like it's a little bit easier to do than having this huge violation in front of them. A time frame for response is usually really good so that you can do check-ins and updates. So if maybe you give them, hey, let's do this in 3 months, and I'll check in every month to see if you've gotten things in order. Do you have the permit? Have you done this or that? Have you had surveyed elevations and things like that? So having a time frame is usually really good. If your entity is at fault, so if the problem is with your office, the community must notify the owner of the violation. So let them know, either most preferably call them before you send a notification letter and let them know. Discuss remedial actions with the owner. Let them know what they need to do and how they can do it if they don't know how to do it. If you have any questions, you can always call our office and we would help you navigate through that. Explore all practicable remedies. So don't just tell them it's a violation. Let them know what they can do to remedy these actions. Every situation is usually different for every violation. So what may work for this one may not work for that one. So make sure that you talk to them through, hey, what is practicable to remedy this violation? And then again, you can use us and FEMA as resources. You can call us. We always have resources for that. And sometimes a community can fail to implement its own ordinance, and the key is to admit the error as soon as it's found so that the remedial action can be taken right away. It is worthwhile to file an errors and omission claim in the case that the oversight is covered by that insurance. Violations need to be corrected regardless of where the money comes from to pay for the cost of remediation. So it doesn't matter if the liability is on the community or on the person, but those remediation has to take place, in short. And so all remedies need to be explored, even if it means that the community buys the structure in order to remove or relocate it. So these are some of the ways that you can go about if your entity is at fault. And again, just saying, hey, this is our fault, we made a mistake, talk to your board if you need, if the cost has to come from the community, talk to your board, let them know what happened, and then get that corrected as soon as possible. Because once you have too many violations and they're up to FEMA, you may face suspicions from the NFIP and things like that. So you do not really want to get to that point. You want to remedy these violations as soon as possible. And for that, we're going to move to our next section, which is the floodplain scenarios that Isabella is going to take away.
So just a quick disclaimer before we start. These are fictional scenarios and may not represent real world conditions. Only general permitting procedures are going to be covered, and you should not take this as a comprehensive guide on floodplain development permitting. Not every scenario can be permitted in the same way every time. Every project is different, so don't take these scenarios or ones permitting a house and think, oh, I'll just follow that exactly for this new project that was proposed in my jurisdiction. don't do that as there could be certain things to take into consideration for your project compared to these scenarios. But hopefully these will just kind of help give it a better general idea of what the permitting process and floodplain management as a whole looks like. So just to give an overview of the general permitting process and its steps, step one would be the project proposal, where the applicant or property owner brings the project to you. Step two is the floodplain development permit application, where they fill out their portion of the application. Step three is the floodplain administrator review of the application, where you go through and check all the information. Step four is where you make a decision. The FPA makes a decision on the permit. Step five is project monitoring, making sure that they're not doing anything outside the scope of the permit and still staying in compliance. And step six is post-construction proof of compliance. And we'll go into that in more detail, but those are just the general steps of the permitting process. Right, so scenario one, also step one, project proposal. A property owner submits a floodplain development permit application to the local floodplain administrator proposing the construction of a single-family residential structure on a parcel they own. The proposed structure is a two-story wood frame home with an attached garage. So already, this is probably unrealistic to a lot of you, as most people probably don't just bring floodplain permit applications to you right away. Typically, especially within smaller communities, they will maybe apply for a building permit, and through that you find out that they're in the floodplain and need the permit. But this is a nice world scenario where they are already aware of the floodplain development permit and submit an application to you. So step two is that permit application. You want to read through the entire application. As you can see, we're using our model permit for this scenario and all the other scenarios. So yours might look different, but we just wanted to use our models as we think it creates a good process and lays out all the information that you do need. So once you have the location, which is on 123 Range Street, you will go to either your firm panel, or probably easier is our floodplain interactive map in view, just to make sure you know what zone it is in. And that they're doing everything correctly. So, and this kind of blends into the review of the application. So here you can see the location of the project. It's that red pin on the image there. And you'll want to note the flood zone. It is a zone A. So this should start getting your gears turning, thinking about what is required for residential structures in A zones. So one of those things is a BFE determination, a base flood elevation. So the process for determining a BFE for a site depends on the flood zone. As we noted, ours was zone A, but there are three places that a BFE can come from. They can come from us, the Nebraska Floodplain Management Division, or a community determination, which are A zones. They can come from flood insurance rate maps for AH and AO zones, will say however many feet above the grade, and flood insurance studies, which is for AE zones when floodways. So again, we noted it as an A zone, so we contacted the Nebraska Department of Water, Energy, and Environment, Floodplain Management Division, and got our BFE determination, which is on the right there. So you'll see there's a bunch of little wavy lines, which are your essentially cross sections. And you will find the location of the project and check what two numbers are around the project, since typically a line doesn't run right through your project. In our example here, the elevations are 1322 and 1321. When it comes to this A zone development, you will always go with the higher number as the BFE, since you can't interpolate between the two numbers. You can't say, well, that looks about halfway, so it's probably 1321.5. You don't do that when you're doing A zone BFE determinations and using ours. So you'll just go with the whole number of 1322 as the BFE. So after you have that BFE, then you'll want to check construction plans for the lowest floor as elevations. because as a Nebraska state standard, residential structures must have their lowest floor at least 1 foot above the VFE. So that lowest floor for our proposed structure must be at or above 1323. So there other required documentation for a zone development. A less than 1 foot rise determination is needed. This doesn't have to be an entire hydrological analysis by an engineer, but it could be if you want to require that. It's up to you on how in depth this less than 1 foot rise should be. And this just means that the proposed construction won't cause 1 foot of rise in the base flood anywhere within the floodplain, not just the immediate surrounding area, but the entire floodplain. So we'll move into and continue with our floodplain administrator review. So you'll want to fill in, this is part D of our model floodplain permit. They're split into 2 parts if you've looked over the permit before. And this is to be completed by you, the FPA. So you'll fill in the information to the best of your ability. And this is using that information that they gave us back in the first 3 parts A, B, or sections A, B, and C that were filled out by the applicant. You'll use whatever they give you to fill out the information here. And if anything is missing, we also have a sample model request for information form that you can use to tell the applicant what they need to provide. It's just a list of all the potential documents that one would need for floodplain development permitting. You'll just check off what they're missing. You can explain it, write a little note if you'd like to, and then just give that back to them so that they have a written copy of something tangible to show them exactly what they're missing and what is required to continue on with the project. So going through our review, first thing is the flood zone. So we know it is flood zone A, so fill that in. Base flood elevation, which we already determined, was 1322, and that came from the Nebraska Floodplain Division. The required flood protection elevation, that is that BFE plus 1 foot, the freeboard amount. So 1323 is what the lowest floor needs to be built to. And those are just the general floodplain information. So we'll move now into the regulatory requirements for the structure itself. So this can feel repetitive a little bit, as you'll see, but it's just important to have these all very clearly stated for your records and to help the property owner or a contractor when they're developing plans, building, etc. So minimum required elevation of top of lowest floor, 1323. And then enclosed area below lowest floor and below BFE would say no, because that would either be a basement, which is not allowed in the floodplain for residential structures, or if you do have a crawl space though, or have elevated your house and have an enclosure underneath like that, that's not a living space. But this one doesn't have that, so we'll move along. This is further down on the permit. So post-construction requirements. A post-construction elevation certificate is required for all structural development to ensure that compliance. So that is a yes. That needs to be completed by a registered surveyor here in the state. And this just makes sure that they are in fact building to that 1323 elevation and that they haven't just said they will and then they didn't. Floodproofing certificate, not required. And then we'll move into these questions. Is proposed development in a designated floodway? No, it is not, so we'd hit no. And then is a proposed development in an A or AE zone without a designated floodway? We would say yes, because we know it's in an A zone. And then we go to the next one. If yes, does this application include a determination that the development will result in less than 1 foot of cumulative floodwater rise? So that's what we discussed before, that you don't need a total engineering analysis to do this, but there should be some kind of determination. If you, the community, is providing that determination, you should write that out in a letter on your official letterhead from your community and sign off on it and attach that to the permit and keep it with it. It's important that this should all be documented together. So we'd say yes, because I didn't make a sample determination, but you can see, we'll just say yes, that they did obtain one. So continuing on to this last section of the floodplain development permit, and these are just requirements of all developments in all flood zones. There's no specific language or specific requirements more than what we've written out here from the Code of Federal Regulations. So it would just be, hopefully, yes, it should be yes, but just generally, is it anchored? Materials and equipment resistant to flooding, minimizing flood damage, adequate drainage, having all of your electrical components and utilities designed to prevent entry of floodwater, and materials that are buoyant, flammable, explosive, could be injurious to human, animal, or plant life. Not applicable here. That's typically for storage of materials. So then here we would, this is really the super helpful section to pay attention to, this is the required submittal documents. You want to check in everything that they do need to properly permit this development. So you'd want that completed application. You want a location map with the floodplain shown, a site plan, construction specifications showing that lowest floor elevation, and a less than 1 foot rise determination. So after we have received all of that information, then it is time for the FPA to make the permit decision. You will approve it, require that information with our model RFI sheet, or you'll deny it because they're missing something or it's not possible to be created in the floodplain. If you'd like, you can choose to set an expiration date for the permit. Not required, but you can choose to do that if you'd like or if your community requires it. But something to note, if work does not begin within 180 days of the permit issuance, it is considered void and they will need to apply for a new permit. This is for all floodplain development permits. This is part of the NFIP, a general rule that for any floodplain development, if it's not started within 180 days, they got to apply for a new permit. And this is just to ensure people aren't holding on to permits from 5 years ago or so and then trying to bring them back and say like, oh, well, you permitted this 5 years ago and I'm just now getting around to it. It's like, no. Conditions might have changed. Let's redo this. So steps 5 and 6, project monitoring and post-construction proof of compliance. So after a permit has been approved, you should continue to monitor the project. Just do like a drive-by inspection, make sure they're not putting up a huge apartment building where you permitted the house or anything crazy like that. But once the project is complete, finished elevations for the house are required to ensure it was built to that at least 1 foot above the BFE. This doesn't have to be that elevation certificate from FEMA, but that is the recommended way to have these elevations provided, as it covers anything, any of the requirements you would need for proof of compliance. So it's just recommended, but not necessarily required to provide the elevations in that form. So once you get that post-construction proof of compliance, then you will file that with the permit and you'll keep that all together in your records indefinitely. Don't ever get rid of your permits, as they are required to be kept forever, basically. So moving into our second scenario, with our first step, project proposal. A property owner owns a single-family residential structure constructed in 1978 within a Zone AE. They're proposing major improvements to the home, including remodeling the kitchen and 2 bathrooms and replacing outdated electrical and plumbing. So pretty major project going on here. We'll first look at this floodplain development permit submitted by Trisha Floodplain. The address is 781 Riverfront Drive. Looks like she filled it out pretty well. They're remodeling kitchen and bathrooms. They correctly marked that it's an existing structure and that alterations are being made to it, and that it has an above ground crawl space, and they even listed out the total square footage of enclosed space of 800 square feet. So it's important to note this was built in 1978. This structure is considered grandfathered, meaning it was built before floodplain regulations. And this allows a residential structure in a Zone AE without any modifications needing to be made to it. So because they are altering an existing structure, you will need a substantial improvement assessment. And as we also just discussed, Zone AE means the floodplain administrator will make the BFE determination using the flood insurance study. So we'll review the application as we did before. You'll look up the address on the map and see that it is an AE zone. The BFE will be determined by the FPA using the flood insurance study. We won't walk through that process in this class due to it being kind of lengthy in its own thing, as Mercy mentioned earlier. But we do have recorded trainings to teach you how to calculate it if you'd like to do that, or we're always happy to help you guys if you want to reach out to us individually, and we can walk through that process with you over our own call. So we did that process. We found using the FIS that the base flood elevation is 1289. And so you'll have the flood protection elevation would be that 1 foot above, standard across Nebraska, 1290, unless your community has it even higher. And then we move into that residential structure requirements, 1290 lowest floor, an enclosed area below the lowest floor and below BFE. Remember they said they had crawl space, so they'd say, yes, there was one, and that it is 800 square feet. And that requirement is 1 square inch of vent opening per square foot of enclosed space. So you have 800 square feet of enclosed space. That means you need 800 square inches of openings within those foundation walls. And minimum requirement elevation for utilities equipment, 1290, that's same as the lowest floor. So here we'll go into more depth on that substantial improvement portion, that since changes are being made to a grandfathered structure, the cost of improvements and value of the structure are required. If the property owner didn't initially supply that the improvement costs, then you can use that RFI to request it from them. And again, we have recorded trainings that go way more in depth on this process. This is just a quick overview, but go check out our YouTube channel if you want to see exactly way more in-depth information on substantial improvement and damage. But then you'll also need the value of the structure. 3 ways to do that. The assessor's page, typically the easiest. You can do a square footage calculation or professional appraisal, whichever you choose. Be consistent. Don't just choose the assessor's page for this one and then go with a square footage calculation for the next person that needs a substantial improvement calculation. We just like you to keep it consistent across your program. So because of that substantial improvement, the entire structure will need to be brought into compliance. And this includes raising the lowest floor and everything with the structure at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation, floodproofing those utilities or elevating them, and properly venting enclosures below the 1 foot above base flood elevation. Again, they have that crawl space, so they will need to make sure that that venting is being done correctly. And you can use the elevation certificate to check the existing structure for elevation of lowest floor and the venting, because maybe it turns out that it was built, it just so happened to be built above the base flood elevation. So that's why it's important to get that the elevations before any construction starts or mitigation actions are taken. So now that we figured out that yes, it is a substantial improvement, we'll continue on with our review. Again, we'll need that elevation certificate to require to verify the structure is above the BFE. The floodproofing certificate required for enclosures below the BFE to be verified, and we'll need a less than 1 foot rise determination, such as we discussed before. And in this case, by floodproofing certificate, that would be referencing the need for flood vents in the crawl space to be certified to meet requirements in the ordinance. So if they're just simply cutting open holes into those walls and leaving them as is, then you, the FPA, would just need to go to the site, measure and check that they have 800 square inches total of openings, and that it counts as the floodproofing certificate. But if they're using something like smart vents, ones that open when there is water infiltration, then you'll need an engineering certificate that states that they follow all the proper requirements. Typically, if you purchase these engineered vents, they come with a certificate when you purchase them. So that just needs to be given to the floodplain administrator and kept on file. Oh, sorry, I didn't walk through this. So yes, we'll need the elevation certificate, the floodproofing certificate. Then we'll move into, is the proposed development within a designated floodway? That'd be no, because just a zone AE. So we'd say yes there. And if yes, does this application include a determination that of the less than 1 foot cumulative rise? And we'll say yes, either we did that or they got some engineer to say that. So for developments in all flood zones, again, we'll want that to be all yes, not applicable since they're not storing any hazardous material. And then for required submittal documents, we'll want that completed application, construction specifications, what exactly they're planning to do, that cost estimate, less than 1 foot rise determination. So then this moves into the permit decision. You'll decide to approve, deny, or request more information. So then making our decision on the permit, we will monitor and post-construction proof of compliance. Same thing as the last time, making sure they're not doing anything crazy. And then you'll want to ensure that elevation certificate is received after construction to verify that they have brought that grandfathered structure into compliance with current NFIP standards. All right, scenario number 3. A newly appointed floodplain administrator is conducting a routine review of properties within the community's floodplain. They discover an existing non-compliant shed located in an A zone of the SFHA. Further investigation reveals that the shed was constructed a year ago and was never properly permitted by the previous FPA. The property owner claims that they were unaware of floodplain regulations. So if you've ever had a CAV with our department, you're probably familiar with this. This happens more than we like it to. But it's not the end of the world if this happens. That's why we're walking through this. There are steps to go back through and make sure that these are properly in compliance with the NFIP. So those first steps will be getting a floodplain development permit. You'll have the owner start a permit. In cases such as these, permits can be issued after the fact if they are being compliant with the floodplain regulations. This isn't just, I discovered this thing happened in the floodplain. I'm just going to write them a permit. No, you still need to go through all the proper permitting documentation and steps. It's just happening after the fact because of either you, the FPA's fault, or the person tried to sweep it under the rug and get by without it. But so yeah, they can be back permitted technically in these cases. You'll also want an elevation certificate. So part of the permit, you'll want elevations of the lowest floor to even determine if or what actions must be taken to bring it into compliance. Because again, like our last house, maybe it was already elevated above the BFE and they don't need to do anything, but you won't know until you get those elevations. So the next steps. Once the permit application has been submitted with those floor elevations, you can discuss those next steps. As I just mentioned, if the shed is above the BFE, then they're fine, and you can sign off on the permit there that they used elevation. But if it is below 1 foot above the BFE, there are 2 options based on the local floodplain management ordinance. If language allowing the wet floodproofing of an accessory structure is adopted within your ordinance, then the owner could install appropriate flood vents or the flood openings. But if you don't have that wet floodproofing language adopted, then the shed must be elevated to 1 foot above the BFE. The final steps for this are after deciding the mitigation action and the rest of the permit is complete and correct, all those steps we walked through before, the less than 1 foot rise determination, etc. Then a decision can be made to approve or deny the permit. And then once the shed has been elevated or those vents installed, you'll need the post-construction proof of compliance, either the elevation certificate or the flood vent requirements, the engineering certificate, or the measured amount of openings. Moving into scenario number 4. A property owner wants to build a house on an empty lot. When the building permit application is reviewed by the FPA, they notice that the site location is not in the regulatory floodplain right now, but will soon be once the new maps are released in the future. So you can see on that picture on the left, out of the floodplain, they should be good. But we do display preliminary boundaries on our map. And so you can see that in a few years' time, when those maps do become effective, that property will be located within the floodplain. So what should you do here? You'll want to start and just have a conversation with the property owner. Let them know about the maps and the situation and how that could affect the development. If they're planning to build a structure with a federally backed mortgage or loan, then they'll have to have that flood insurance requirement. Or if they build something now, they'll have the grandfathered status on that structure, and substantial improvement and damage requirements will apply to it. So it's just really important to take these things into consideration. So maybe they could change their plans now and already be in compliance with the incoming floodplain regulations. Of course, we do recommend building to floodplain regulations. That'd probably be the easiest and best way for them to not have to get that mandatory flood insurance. If they're already following those requirements, then they'll be good with their yeah, sorry, lost my train of thought there, but yeah, we recommend building to the requirements as it just makes it easier. But if they're interested, you could give them the materials on a letters of map change. Letters of map change, such as LOMAs or LOMAR-Fs, can't be done before the new maps are effective. You can't submit them for preliminary maps, but they could get all the information and required documentation before those maps become effective. And then once they are effective, you could submit those materials and see if you could get a letter of map change from FEMA then. Moving on to scenario 5. A property owner has a parcel of land that is halfway in the special flood hazard area, and the other half of it is not. They want to build a storage facility in the area that is in the special flood hazard area. The owner claims that all the parcel is out of the floodplain and therefore does not need a floodplain permit. So this could kind of tie back into Mercy's half of the presentation on maybe difficult property owners that you're dealing with. This happens to floodplain administrators a lot. The owner says, well, it's never flooded here. It's not in the floodplain. I know that. Well, it doesn't just come down to word of mouth, sadly. You'll want to get documentation and look on the floodplain map of where exactly this structure is going to be located. So here, they gave us the documentation that they're planning to put the shed in that where that orange box is, and that the red outline is their parcel. So you as the floodplain administrator determine if something is within the floodplain. You can call us and ask for our division's help on that, but we can't tell you, oh yeah, that's definitely within the floodplain. It is up to your determination. For something like this, you could say that that is within the floodplain. If we're talking like I'm the floodplain administrator, I would make that determination that the orange square is in the floodplain. You can see that boundary there, that zone A boundary of the blue blob. But this is why it's important to ask the contractor for detailed site plans, preferably with the floodplain already shown. It'll make this determination much easier. You're not trying to guess where they're going to be doing this construction or trying to line up their site plans and compare it to the floodplain map. It's easier if they just do it themselves and have it all lined up so that you can have very exact information to go off of. So since the location is within the floodplain, the regulatory flood maps, you'll want to talk with that property owner, use the tips Mercy gave earlier on communication, show them the maps, and explain that because it is in the floodplain development permit is required, and that they would need to follow the regulations within the floodplain management ordinance. So you could also suggest that since they do own property, that parcel is only halfway in the floodplain, they could still build it on that same parcel, but have it outside the floodplain boundary. Then they wouldn't need to have that permit or build to the regulations in the ordinance. So yeah, no permit needed, but that doesn't mean it's absolved of all flood risk. Again, as everyone here probably knows, flood maps are a simulation. used under certain conditions. So, and building that close to a floodplain boundary, you probably are at a higher risk than something out way far away from a floodplain boundary. So just keep that in mind. They'll want to think about that. You'll want to mention it to them that there still is some risk of flooding if they choose to build just outside of the boundary. If they're still really insistent that that's not the floodplain, you can give them, as we talked in the last scenario, information on letter of map change. They could look into a LOMA, or they could bring in fill if they really wanted for the shed and have a LOMA RF, whatever they would like to pursue. But if they do want to go this route, they cannot start their work until the letter of map change has been approved. They can't start the shed and you're like, hey, what you doing? You didn't submit a permit. And they're like, oh, the letter, FEMA's working on that. Yeah. No, you need to have that. They need to have that letter and it needs to be approved before they can start anything. There have been cases where property owner applied for a letter of map change. The community saw it. They just saw, oh, yep, FEMA marked that there's a letter of map change for that property, but they didn't actually go in and look into that letter, and that letter was actually denied. So there's just a mark that they had applied for it, but it wasn't approved. So the construction that they had done was actually not compliant because they never got approval for that letter of map change. So you want to make sure that they have that letter of map change and that it is approved before any work starts. So just some general recommendations. Providing an approved permit may not provide clear enough instructions to builders. You might want to consider including a letter detailing exactly what you expect from the permit. And it also provides your direct contact information so that they know who to reach out to if they have any questions. You can never provide anybody too much information on floodplain development, since there's a lot of, it really differs from scenario to scenario as we've discussed. So just providing them exact information could really help them out and avoid any mistakes being made. And also, always feel free to engage us at the Floodplain Management Division for help with permit reviews and project proposals. We don't do the permitting for anybody, but we are always happy to look over the permit materials that have been submitted to you and give feedback on, yes, this is compliant. Oh, they're still missing this piece. We are very happy to do that, and along with other project proposals too. I just wanted to plug our upcoming trainings. Thursday, April 16th, we have Getting Your Board on Board, Communicating Floodplain Management with Local Leadership. It's important to get everybody in the same boat that how important floodplain management is for your community and your residents. Then very excitingly, on April 22nd and 23rd, we have the 2026 Nebraska Floodplain Conference. That's in person here at our office in Fallbrook in Lincoln. Registration is up on our website on the same training page that you use to register for this class. And there's lots more information. 2 days. We'll do our basic class. We'll have people from other departments and professionals coming to discuss floodplain topics. We'll have a couple panels by floodplain administrators discussing either violations or problems they've run into or their general process. It's overall a super helpful resource, and we definitely recommend coming to visit us in person. And it is free, so keep that in mind too. And then floodplain management scenarios and having difficult conversation after hours. If you guys didn't get enough in this class, you can come join us on Wednesday, May 13th for an after hours presentation that will be 6 to 8 p.m. Or maybe there's someone you know of that would like this presentation, but they couldn't attend because it's during the day. Totally understand. So they can come and hang out in the evening with us and get all this information. And maybe using your guys' feedback here, we can improve upon it before that class too. So also have to plug our socials. This past week has been Severe Weather Awareness Week. So we've had posts every day on tips on how to be safe during severe weather. So you can go check those out. And yeah, if you guys have any more questions, please keep them coming. And also if something comes to mind after this presentation ends, email us. We are always here to help. This entire team you see on screen, this is our entire job, is helping you guys manage your programs and figuring out how to do this tricky thing called floodplain management. So please never hesitate to email or call us with any questions you have. They may seem silly. They're not. Promise we've heard them before. So please, please, please let us know if we can help you.